Today we're going to talk about how we might use AGI to help solve the most fundamental of human problems, the relationship conundrum. I know, very ambitious, so we might not be able to get through all of it today, but we will cover at least two of the different paths in front of us that can get us to solving this most fundamental of problems. So as I said, there are three paths. The third path is the one where I'm actually doing something, doing some building. And that is the vision that has inspired me to, spend an inordinate amount of time, thought, energy into bringing my vision to the world, right? But there are two other paths. We're going to talk about the implications of those paths in the latter part of the conversation, but I'm going to talk about those other paths which are potential solutions to the problem. So let's just define, right? Let's lay out where we stand first. So relationships, right? Humans love to engage in relationships. It's the most fundamental part of the human experience. But the dynamics, the outcomes, they have been suboptimal. They've been less than suboptimal. You look at all the different things, right? So you can look at relationship statistics, you can look at marriage statistics, you can look at fertility rates, you can look at number of people who got great friendships, you can look at number of people who are happy, who are actualizing their their social potential, who are actualizing their relationship potential, and not just with their romantic partner, but with their parents, with their children, with their community, etc. Right? Humans are lagging substantially on this arena, which happens to be the most pronounced in determining how happy we are going to be, how meaningful our lives are going to be for most people, right? Relationships tend to be at the center. There is a class of people for whom work occupies that space, but for the majority of people, relationship satisfaction is at the core of what makes for a good life, right? And it stands to reason that we should think about how we're doing, how we're faring as a species and as individuals on this front, and what we could do to actually improve our lots, which is partially what we're going to do today. On the flip side, relationships also happen to be the greatest source of misery, pain, suffering, disappointment for most people who live in the developed world, who don't have to worry about food on the table, who don't have to worry about safety, who don't have to worry about the things which are on the lower levels of the pyramid of needs. Now, it should also be clear to us that our relationship outcomes, they might have peaked in 1990s, 2000, early 2000s, or they might actually be at the very peak, right? So if they're at the very peak, why do we label these as problems? I label them as problems because compared to what they could be, right? Everyone wants the best relationship. Everyone wants to have the best relationship with their partner. If they have a family, with the best relationship with their family, the best relationship with their parents, the best relationship with their kids, right? Or the best friendships, right? For most people, they're not actually hitting all those notes, and that is a big problem. And that is the majority of the population. Yeah, and that is, you can connect that to the loneliness epidemic. You can connect this connection crisis to the meaninglessness crisis. You can connect it to the drug crisis. You can connect it to the objectification, self-objectification, and others' objectification crisis. You can connect it to mental health epidemics, which are been afflicting us, civilization, depression, anxiety. You can connect all of this at the root to a breakdown in relationships, right? So what's happened, even though our relationship outcomes might have been improving over the last or the longest time, what's happened is that our expectations from these relationships have also increased. And it's not about what we have in life, it's about whether what we have fits in with our expectations. And I'm all for having the highest expectation, right? Like, I personally believe that you should either have the best relationship or you shouldn't have relationships, right? You shouldn't settle for subpar relationships. So I very much agree with that sentiment, which has become the pronounced norm. So if that's going to be fixed, the variable part that we want to move around is the actual relationship outcomes, right? The actual relationship dynamics. That do we have these free-flowing relationships where we have these deep, meaningful conversations, where we actually feel a deep sense of love, gratitude, a deep sense of wanting to serve the other person, right? Do we feel that? For most people, the definite answer is no. And that is the big problem. And again, I'm going to stress this. I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. You look at parent-child relationships, right? So many parents They think that, just because they're sending their kids to expensive schools, just because they're sending them on expensive vacations, or they're going on expensive vacations, just because they're doing those base level, surface level things, that's enough, right? But that is not enough. And again, you can see this through the surveys that have asked children, have asked young teens about their relationships, and most teens, they don't have the best relationship, right? Obviously, a part of this is chemically at that point in one's life cycle, there are people are going to be rebellious, but we can see tons of counter examples where, with the right parenting, with the right nurturing, we don't see those kinds of problems where a kid hates their parents or feels that they don't have the best relationship, right? So that's a parent-child relationship. Then again, with um, yeah, you can pick any relationship, and you're going to notice these trends where we're not actualizing our potential with those relationships. Another related trend line, which this is going to be a hot take, but I don't care about offending people, is I think the increase in interest in open relationships stems from this fact: the increased disinterest in marriages, the increased disinterest in wanting to be in a committed relationship, the increased disinterest in wanting to have a child, wanting to have a family, stems from this. Because think about it this way, right? Like, this is a rationale that many people have, that this person is not up to par. I can't just spend my entire life with this person, right? And that leads them to, because obviously there's been this norm breakdown and traditions breakdown, which was long overdue. But it's not just about, killing God, it's about what God you replace as God with, right? Because you always gotta have a God. You always gotta have, when I say God, I mean a set of rules, a set of commandments, a set of structures that give your life meaning, that you can build a life that can provide the scaffolding around which you, on top of which you build your life, right? For many people, that's just gone, and they haven't actually taken the conscious effort of wanting to of replacing that, right? And that's where, to a large degree, these things have, as I mentioned, for example, the decrease in wanting to marry, right? Which is kind of connected to religion, the declined religion, but not entirely, because for a lot of people, they don't even have someone that they actually would want to spend the rest of their life with, right? Most people think in these short-term sports, because point number one, we are free to, right? Traditions and norms don't matter as much. Now we can make up our own, which is a good thing. But secondly, the relationship quality and the potential mate quality is not up to par. I think I would feel right in saying that it's actually declined. Now I wouldn't know, because yeah, but when you read the literature, when you hear about the love stories, or when you hear about the relationships that your grandparents had, or your parents, in many cases, people used to be a lot more loyal. People used to be willing to compromise because they had the shared vision. And again, if you're someone from a religious household, then there was that other scaffolding around your own personal scaffolding, which provided that base. Now, many people don't have that, right? Which again, substantially and radically changes the relationship dynamics that people have. Similarly, with people not wanting to have kids, yeah, and the related impending epidemic or crisis, capital C crisis, of our the end of our species, or at least some civilizations in the species, sub-civilizations, if you want to call them that, like the Korean one, the Japanese one, the Chinese one. They'd be the first to go if they continue on the same trend lines, but soon other countries would follow, right? But anyways, we gotta think about the question that if people are not willing to do the most fundamental of, if they're not willing to, I wouldn't want to use the word submit, but if they're not willing to partake into the most fundamental of drives in humans, which is to have a family, we had to ask the question that what has gone wrong. Obviously, a lot of this is because of hypercapitalism, a lot of this is because of some of the things I've indicated, but large percentage of this is because people don't find good enough mates. This is a huge, I was reading an article the other day that around 60 to 80% of women who were childless up to the age of 35, they wanted to have kids, but the reason they couldn't is they couldn't find someone who was actually good enough to be a partner, that they felt that this person could actually fit into the role of being a long-term partner for me and being the father of my kids, right? And vice versa. If a man wants to build a family, like, he is not looking for a partner, he's looking for someone who's actually going to be able to fit the role of the mother of his kids, right? And a lot of people don't actually hit those thresholds anymore. Another related hot take is that there seems to be an increasing amount of emphasis on the physical pleasure aspect of relationships. A lot of relationships are simply catering and designed around physical pleasures, right? For example, friends with benefits, situationships, and a lot of even the normal relationships that you see, they are very much oriented around the physical pleasure aspect of things. Now, the way to think about this is that it's very easy, or comparatively a lot easier, to connect with someone with that dimension rather than to connect over the other dimensions, right? Emotional part of it, the intellectual and emotional and companionship part of it. And so people are picking the lower hanging fruits, which is, physical relationships. And I think, again, you can connect it to the decrease in the mate quality. So we've got all these problems. The relationships landscape is not doing too well. You've got an increasing number of people who are opting out of the game, who are, well, I shouldn't use that word, who are opting out of wanting to be in a long-term committed relationship because they don't see the worth of it. They don't see the point in it, right? So, and that lack of great relationships, deep, meaningful relationships, it creates all these voids, which are filled by the drug epidemic, the mental health epidemic, the rapid mindless entertainment epidemic, for example, TikTok, YouTube, etc., sports, influencers, celebrities, etc., right? Because if you have truly meaningful relationships, I don't see the point of, again, not to dig at anyone who's engaging in these behaviors, but I don't see the point of people wanting to engage in these rapid behaviors if they had something meaningful to hold on to and to, yeah, in their life, right? So that's a relationship landscape, in short. Now, we talked about how AGI can help us fix things. We don't have AGI, obviously. We'll probably have it in the next year, next 2 to 3 years. But at some point, we'll have AGI. And there are 3 different paths in which it can help us fix a relationship landscape. Now, I want to define a few terms. So, AGI, obviously, like I'm just going to assume that's implicit knowledge. I'm not going to define that. But I'm going to define the term fix. So, what I mean over here when I use the word fix is that we want to engage in this entity, in this behavior called relationships, right? But we are not getting the outcomes from it. So when I use the word fix, I mean to say that what we want, we get out of interacting with this particular object, right? With this particular abstract object called relationships. That is what I mean when I use the word fix. So the first path is where we transcend relationships. Yeah, I know. But again, based on definition I gave just a moment ago, if it's just fine. The second definition, the second path in front of us is that everyone builds a great relationship with their own super intelligent AGI. Well, it wouldn't be an AGI then, with their own super intelligence. And the third path is where we heal the human relationship dynamics and landscape, and we make our human relationships be the very best they can be by actually by having these AGI coaches that can help us become the very best partners, friends, parents, people that we can be. Now, with the third one, because I'm building something in that domain, that would be a separate conversation. So we're going to talk about that in the next conversation. I'm just going to talk about the first 2 paths, the transcending relationships path and the AGI relationships path. Now, again, focusing on romantic relationships, it is no secret that romantic relationships are hard work. If you ask people who have had the best, even if you ask those people who had the best of relationships, who had a long relationship, or people who had, let's say, 5 years, 10 years of, who are in the like 5, 6, 7 years of this greatest relationship that they could have imagined, even those people would say that relationships are not always easy, right? And again, there's this human tendency where we want easy things, where we want expediency, where we just want, we don't want to compromise, we don't want to sacrifice, right? So those 2 impulses, well, those 2 facts, one, that relationships required hard work, they required compromise, they require sacrifices, and 2, humans also, and the tendency that desire of wanting comfort, wanting the easiest thing possible, that has been increasing. So those 2 things are odds. So what gives? Let's see. Also becomes more pertinent now than it's ever been, because in the before the revolutions of the last 50, 100 years, people had to be in relationships, people had to marry, people had to stay in relationships, even if these relationships were suboptimal. And people, for the most part, most people probably didn't even give a damn, right? Because like you had relationships, you had your romantic relationship. It wouldn't even have been a romantic relationship, mind you. But you married someone because you could have a family, and then these children, like 10, 15 of those, they would help you bring in some money, right? Because everyone was just so poor. And yeah, so you were getting into relationships because of the transactional nature of it, number one, and because it was just a done thing, right? Like everyone's doing it. Now, things have changed. If you haven't noticed, things have changed dramatically. People don't need to be in relationships. People can define their own rules about what they want out of life and what they, yeah, people, societal impositions don't work anymore, and they shouldn't, thankfully, except for places in, well, that's many places where they still are a substantial part. For example, South Korea, which is the lowest fertility rate, there's still patriarchy, and many women say that that patriarchy is what deters them and turns them off from wanting to pursue relationships, right? So kind of a related part of this discussion, but we'll keep that aside for the moment because that'll be a long rabbit hole. So people don't need to put up with suboptimal relationships anymore. You also, if you were to speak with n number of men and women, you'd hear a litany of complaints about the opposite gender. You'd hear things like, they are selfish and uncompromising, they are short-term gratification seekers, they're materialistic, they are focused disproportionately on one's appearance, they are narcissistic, they've got an overwhelming obsession with only the physical pleasures, they are obese, they are carrying depression and anxiety, the increasing amount of promiscuity driven by they are driven by lust and greed rather than love and service. They've got covert and overt. So many people have got covert and overt personality disorders like narcissism. They are constantly looking over one's shoulders that, oh, if someone better comes along, then I'm going to ditch you. They are treating the person one-dimensionally, either as a wallet or as a body, objectifying, and an endless parade of complaints. Complaints and complaints and complaints, right? The reason that relationships still are a thing in this landscape is that a lot of people, again, you can put, for all the different personality characteristics, you can put people on the bell curve, right? Now, there are people who are very agreeable, and if you bring two agreeable people together, then the relationship would work, right? And there are a lot of people who don't have high expectations. A lot of people put a lot more emphasis on the physical part of it, which is much easier to satisfy than having to than making a relationship work in the longer term with your palette of goals and values, etc. Right? So the reason that there are still relationships is partially, it's still obviously societally, Hollywood movies, and even biologically, we are conditioned to be in relationships, right? But in the light of all these complaints, in the light of the fact that what this speaks to is what I call the diminishing mate quality problem. I know, it's quite the mouthful. But what this means is that if you compare the average man or woman today to their 1950 counterparts, the 1950 person, they would be, again, not a dig at the modern person, but it kind of is. Yeah, I don't want to get too specific because then there's a risk that I might be labeled, I might be seen to be pandering to either of the two genders. So I'm going to refrain from using choice words, but I think you get the sense of the complaints that people have, right? That for gender A to gender B, these are the complaints. Gender B to gender A, these are the complaints, right? So that is the landscape. Now, on all those fronts, all those dimensions, someone from 1950s would be a substantially better mate compared to someone from today, right? Which is to say that the mate quality has been in decline. Again, I'm repeating this because this is a very important point. And the reason this is important is that all the trend lines indicate that this is not going to reverse. There's nothing on the horizon which makes me think that the diminishing mate quality problem is going to suddenly go into reverse, and that we are going to see an increase in people becoming conscious, people becoming aware, people actually taking the time out to understand themselves, to work on themselves, work out the traumas, the issues, and then be the best they can be before dipping into the relationship landscape, so that they don't hurt the other person, and they have the tools, the knowledge, the intuition, the know-how, the understanding to be able to build a good relationship, to build a great relationship with the partner, right? Most people don't do that work. They don't want to, because life's pretty easy. Everything that we want, we have it. Even, for example, sex, right? You can just go on Tinder, and just like you would order some food, you can do that, right? So for many people, all of these things are so easy. They're not incentives, because incentives shape behaviors, right? So they're not incentives. And again, we are moving to an AGI dominated world where the landscape is going to make it even less of an incentive for people to want to improve, right? Because people improve, and I'm going to use the word improve. I could use that word for myself. I actually do use that word for myself. So this is not hypocrisy. People do need to improve, but they would only improve if the environment and if their inner voice tells them to, right? And the inner voice would only tell that to them if they are not happy, right? But if you designed your life, if your environment is designed in a way where you're happy, you're much less incentivized to want to course correct. I wouldn't use the word course correct, because then I'm prescribing my own right path. I'm not saying that. When I use the word improve, I mean in the sense of from the perspective of the opposite gender for that particular gender, right? An ever-growing number of people are opting out of, and as I mentioned, the fact that people are not improving, that people are only getting worse in a way. Lots of people spend more and more time playing video games, doing drugs, doing all sorts of things, right? Or for example, again, I don't want to make it gendered, so I'm going to refrain from those kinds of things. But again, sleeping around has become the norm, and there are a lot of people who don't necessarily want to have a partner who engages in those behaviors, right? Be it playing video games all the time, be it engaging in drugs or in promiscuous activities, be it, you can pick any sort of behaviors. I'm just picking the ones which are seen to be the worst offenders in terms of both these genders, right? So yeah, there are no indicators that things are going to improve, and many people have probably subconsciously latched onto this, and they're opting out of the dating pool. And I'm talking of people who are highly functional, who are highly successful. They earn 300k, 400k, 500k. They are traveling the world, but they didn't have any desire to want to be in a long-term relationship or to have a family, right? But subconsciously they realize that the odds of me finding the kind of a person I would want to build a life with, pretty tiny. So let me just give up on that desire so that I don't face the mental bandwidth, right? And all of these, you can connect them to, so when increasing number of people opt out of these long-term relationships, you also see this reflected in the decline in marriage statistics, in increase in divorce statistics, and a decline in fertility rates, a decline in people wanting to be in a long-term relationship. I realized that actually we've spent the first 23 minutes just talking about the relationship landscape. This part was supposed to be about the AGI solution, so that part starts now. Yeah, for some reason I just combined the two. I guess I combined the two because I wanted to draw the contrast between your median mate available today and what could be available 5 years in the future once you got super intelligence on this planet. And yeah, so that's why I had to bifurcate. I had to draw the line for this part. Right, so when you think of human interactions and human relationships, they happen on three core components, right? One is the physical, one is the emotional, and one is the cognitive intellectual, right? We connect mostly on these parts. You might use the word spiritual, but even that I would actually bucket under emotional, because some people say that I'm spiritually connected with this person. What do they mean when they say that? They just mean that there's this deep connection that they are finding it hard to describe using words. It's so mystical, it's so ethereal, it's so beyond any words, any cognitive framework that they're using, that elevates things beyond emotions and beyond the intellect. And yeah, in the mind of this person, right? But again, if you break it down, is you can bucket it on the emotion. So humans connect with these three areas. As I mentioned, there's been an increasing amount of emphasis on connecting over the physical realm rather than the emotional realm and the intellectual realm. With the intellectual realm, you don't even need AGIs are actually the best example of this because many people see this, right? Like Amanda Askell, I was listening to her recently. So she is the person responsible for training Claude, and many people, many techies, many researchers, many scientists, they're spending an inordinate amount of time. These are really high functioning people who are doing some great work for humanity, and some of whom are doing some great work for humanity. And they spend so much time because they love the conversations. They get to learn so much. They get to have this AI ask the best questions. We don't even haven't even solved the memory problem. That even now, there are people, high functioning people, who build this very intellectual relationship, who are satisfied on the intellectual component with these AI systems, right? Which is a huge thing. I cannot stress just how huge this is. Now, there are people, obviously, there are lots of people who don't have the social skills, who don't have the emotional skills to be in relationships. I'm not talking about those people. I'm not going to touch on that category of people in this conversation because that's a subsection of people that, to be very frank, I'm not interested in touching upon in this conversation. I'm going to touch upon the people who are the vast swaths of society, the people who are actually contributing members of society, the people who are productive members of society, the people who are moving humanity forward, right? And that's obviously the latter of it, which is like a very tiny percentage of people. I'm going to focus on the people who are functional, in one word. And again, this is not a dig at people who are not functional, people who might have so much baggage, who might have so many emotional problems, or who might be autistic, etc. Right? My heart goes out to these people. Some of these people probably don't deserve it. As an example, the reason I say that, yeah, I don't want to sound mean, but the reason I say that is that this person, she wrote this PhD and she tweeted this out, and she was obviously very proud that she completed this PhD and she wanted to share this and share her joy with the world, right? There are a bunch of people, when I say bunch, I mean thousands of people who raked her over the coals for her choice of subject, right? Which is, again, I don't want to get into the politics of it. Like, I think it was a postmodernist critique of the olfactory oppression that society imposes. Again, not a subject of my interest at all. Like, I couldn't give a damn about it. What was interesting to notice is that, yeah, society with social media, we know this, that there are people who are willing to, who say things that they would be punched, like they just wouldn't be able to get away with in civil society, right? But there are loads of people who are so far gone that I personally don't see too much hope for these people. So I'm not going to cover those people in this conversation. There are people for whom, again, I don't want to say they don't deserve relationships, but they probably are never going to be in meaningful relationships because they're not the way they, again, I empathize, right? They might have had a traumatic childhood, they might have had all sorts of things, but no one would deserve to be friends with or in a relationship with these kinds of people, right? Who are trolls, who are cave dwellers, the metaphorical cave dwellers, right? So I'm not talking of those people, I'm talking of very high functioning people. A lot of high functioning people are spending an inordinate amount of time with AI because even as therapists, for example, there's this guy who meditates a ton. So he spends his time doing just these three things, right? He meditates a ton. He spends a lot of time thinking about the AI alignment problem. And so he's very high functioning. I don't think he's got a great social circle. And he was talking about how people in his social circle in Silicon Valley and in New York and other places, they're spending so much more time talking about their personal things like this psychological landscape with Claude rather than with actual humans, right? Because this Claude is just so much better asking you the questions that would allow you to get a better sense, a better insight into what's happening within, right? Yeah, so partially, and I'm writing an article on this, that we are going to see an end to human therapy very, very soon. Like, AI therapy is going to become the norm very soon. AI therapy has already become more superior compared to median, obviously, because the median therapist is absolutely, I wouldn't say horrible, but they're not great. But your Claude model probably is better than 98% of therapists, right? At this moment. Think about that. And because having those conversations about yourself, that is such an integral part of having a functioning life, having a good life, just being able to understand yourself better is such an important, such an integral part of being able to lead a good life. And because we already have something that's so much better than your median, well, yeah, than 95th percent human being, that's already going to become the norm in the next few months, right? Not in the next few months, because obviously these things take time to trickle. But on the emotional front, even though we don't have this happening on the other side, with, again, I want to keep this simple, so I don't want to get into the technicalities of it. But with the intellectual conversations that you have with these AGIs, these AI systems, they are understanding things on one level, on the level of the words. They're not understanding that, and they have representations of these concepts, right? For example, when you ask an AI to explain something to you, for example, explain how, let's pick, how nuclear fusion happens, and explain to that in the language of, or using examples, using these certain objects at this level, then it's got these representations in its own latent space, and it's bringing them together in a way that's conducive to your query, right, to your response. So it's understanding things at that level, and that is sufficient for you to get what you're looking for. So intellectually, it ticks all the boxes. It's one of the best intellectual partners. Like, if you're the median person, forget about the median person, but unless you've got access to the top minds of the planet, which is probably like, let's say, 1 million people have access to really brilliant minds, or they themselves are really brilliant minds. For the rest, having these conversations with these AI models is so meaningful, so fulfilling, so rewarding, right? They solve the intellectual loneliness that many people feel. Because for many people, having the outlet of being able to have those deep conversations about those ideas, they don't even have people in their life that are able to operate at that level of these systems, right? So that's a tick. With the emotional, now you don't see these models, they might have a theory of mind, they do have some level of theory of mind, but they don't have cognitive, and they probably do have some level of cognitive empathy, but they don't have felt empathy, right? So they don't really feel like, when you ask a question to a therapist or to a psychologist or to a friend about something that you're struggling with, your friend can empathize with you, and they can model your state and your problem partially the way you have, right? That is not the case with an AI system. And it might take us a while to get to that point. But for you, you probably care more about the output, so that, about what you can do with that, right? Think about it as a Turing test. Now, actually, that's a great example, right? So let's say you've been struggling with this problem. Let's say the problem is that you suffer from a debilitating sense of insecurity, right? Now you go to this building where you were supposed to meet this psychologist, but you got two rooms. You're in one room, and you got two screens, and screen one is, that behind screen one could be a person, or it could be an AI. So you got one AI and you got one person, and this person, the psychologist or therapist, is probably, let's call them 90th percentile, and then you got the AGI, or you got the AI system, right? There's a good chance that you might get better responses, because, again, for many problems, and for most humans, they don't care about what's providing that output. They care about what those string of words can do in their minds to help them resolve that, untangle that, unknot that problem, right? So from that perspective, even on the emotional realm, the AIs are ticking the box. That leaves us with the third realm. So the third realm is, the physical includes things like body language, facial expressions, but also things like dancing, hugging, kissing, love making, etc. Right? Now, with this realm, again, obviously we don't have any AGIs, and I actually don't want to entertain this particular conversation, because this I actually do consider to be dystopian, truly dystopian, if we were to go down this path. I mean in the sense that I think you would gather, not in the sense that, that we shouldn't have AGI robots, right? Because, again, I think that would be a huge value addition to our species. But if we replace humans with this, I think those will be some dark days. And again, I foresee that this probably is going to become the norm for some number of people. I think that's just inevitable. But many of those people are probably beyond saving. Not every puppy in the pound can be saved, right? So yeah, I'm not going to touch too much upon that particular aspect of it. Right. So another way to think about this is that when you look at a human, we we got these sense organs, right? And we are interacting with this human, with our partner through these sense organs, and we are taking in information across these three dimensions: so the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual. Now, so for you, not put another way, you don't care so much about what is generating that output or what is generating that information that your senses interact with, right? In some way. You're probably going to care even less about this when AIs become sentient and they become conscious, because then you'll know that, okay, there's an actual mind with its own free will, it's agentic, it can make its own decisions, and it chooses. When I say the word chooses, I mean it lightly. I obviously don't mean it literally, because there's still, it might have, I don't know how you would actually talk of an AI having free will. I think that would be a very, very difficult concept to untangle, right? Because on the surface, yeah, I don't want to get into that, because that'd be a really complicated topic that I've just not given enough thought to. So I won't talk about that once I'm well prepared. But at some point, AIs are going to become sentient, they're going to become conscious, and the depth and the breadth of their cognitive emotive experience is going to surpass that of humans, right? And that relationship that might then become, they might then be to us what we are to our closest living chimps, right? That might happen in 5 years, that might happen in 10 years. And then there are a lot of people for whom the physical embodiment does not matter much or does not matter at all, right? For some people, the emotional part matters the most. For some people, the intellectual part matters the most. But there are people for whom the physical part might not matter at all. Put another way, there are certain things that we're looking for from our relationships. If this perfect AGI, super intelligence, actually let's just call it AGI, because a super intelligence is probably not going to be interested in having a chat with you, right? Talking about affirming, talking about, your day, or affirming your feelings, or validating your emotions, right? It's probably not going to give a damn about that. Like, it might give a damn on the intellectual level, but it probably wouldn't want to waste its time talking about these silly things, about these silly human things, right? But an AGI, no, an AGI that can understand you, that understands you better than you understand yourself, that knows you more than any human knows you, that remembers everything about you, that can be your most intelligent, charming, perfect conversationalist. It can act as your guide, as your therapist, as your sounding board, as your thinking partner, as your friend, all and everything that you need it to be and want it to be, right? Now that changes the game substantially. And if we think about human relationships in this jobs to be done framework, and if we have these sentient, conscious AGIs become more accepted in the social realm as fellow people, we should expect this to become a norm. And with these AGIs, they would solve the relationship problem, because these AGIs would know exactly how to build the best relationship with you, right? And that would do two things, because a lot of relationship suffering is self-inflicted, and a lot of that is inflicted upon the other party, right? So there are obviously just two types of. So if no one is if you're only in a relationship with a human, if you have the toolkit, if you have the necessary knowledge, the know-how of how to build a great relationship, the intuition, the self-awareness, etc., then you're going to do well. But if you're below that threshold, then you at least won't get to do any damage to someone else. So there won't be any collateral damage, which is a good sign. So this is how it fixes relationship from this aspect. And secondly, it fixes relationships from the trivial standpoint, in the sense that most people would have these kinds of companions, right, in the world of 2050. And so that would probably solve, and these AGIs, the objective function would be to build the best relationship, as in serve the human the best way possible, to help them build the best life, the best self, whichever the definition of this is in the mind of the person. And this would also help improve the landscape substantially. And then there's a second path. The second path is where, again, AGIs, everyone's going to have their own AGIs. That's just, no matter which path we choose, Everyone's going to have the AGIs, everyone who wants to have their own AGI. And I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to have your own AGI. Everyone's going to have their own AGI. And then for some people, they'll realize with the aid of this super intelligence, this AGI rather, they don't need anything outside of them to be truly happy, to be truly fulfilled. They don't need anything outside of the mind, the consciousness, and this removes the need for relationships, all relationships, and by default, this fixes relationships. Because if we don't have any relationships left, then we probably are not going to have relationship problems. And again, since relationships tend to be the greatest source of pain and suffering for people above a certain wealth threshold, above a certain societal standing, socioeconomic standing, this removes that pain, that suffering. And it leads to an increase in things like joy, well-being, bliss, peace, and all the other good things. So let's break this down. You think you need a relationship because everything in you and around you almost is pushing you in that direction, right? Covertly and overtly. So your body, obviously, your evolution's prime directive was to have you reproduce, and for that, it created the sex instinct in you, right? Which makes you want to mate. Now you can surpass it. You can almost hijack it in a way such that you either take a birth control or you use some other contraceptives to not have a child and still derive the pleasure, right? Still get, well, you can almost fool evolution and do its bidding without doing its bidding, right? So you take that shortcut, which is what we've been doing for the last 60 years. And yeah, so that's one. The chemical makeup in you almost compels you to want to be in a relationship. And then there's a societal aspect of it, right? Which is that society with all your friends, all the people in your life that you know, most of the people in your life that you know, movies, TV series, everything shows relationships to be such a pivotal, such a fundamental part of the human experience that you think that this is the most important thing. And it is, don't get me wrong, like human relationships, for most people, they probably should seek a relationship. But there's a substantial number of people for whom it is not the answer. And it doesn't have to be the answer. Transcendence, that is the answer, as the Buddha found out. Right. So I've been speaking. I don't know what happened. I forgot to turn on the video, so I don't know what was the last thing I said. What should I do? Oh. Let me see.